Dr. Brandon Mogrovejo is a first-generation Latino physician at the Columbia Morgan Stanley Children's Hospital, where he trains in pediatrics. He makes inclusive medical comic books with diverse, underrepresented characters in his spare time for young adults and families, hoping to improve patient support and learning. He was born in a working-class family to an Ecuadorian father and an Italian-American mother before becoming the first in his family to go to medical school at the Columbia University Vagelos College of Physicians and Surgeons. He attended college at Fordham University, where he double majored in African and African American studies and biology and minored in theology. Brendan is a very proud New Yorker who lives in his favorite borough, the Bronx, with his beautiful, ever-entertaining wife and their three mischievous, always hungry cuyas, guinea pigs. Some of his many interests include narrative medicine, comics, anime, video games, politics, racial health disparities, and advocacy work for vulnerable populations. His prior work, including a comic book on type 1 diabetes entitled Liz Unity and Her Somatic Adventures, can be found on his website, as well as shared in the links shared with all of you. Without further ado, I'm happy to introduce you to Dr. Brandon Moore.
Thank you, Paul. It's great to be here to speak with all you guys, and I'm truly honored. And I've been looking forward to this talk for a number of weeks now, and I hope you guys will enjoy what I have to say and share. So yeah, here is my talk. I've entitled it Creating Narratives in My Medical Training. I think I'm going to touch on points of creating narratives in medicine more broadly, but I also want to emphasize that this is sort of my path, my blueprint, and something that you can hopefully inspire you, something you can take from, but also not necessarily your path in life. And just want to emphasize there's many paths to get to being a physician, to get to doing narrative medicine work, and this is just one of them for you. So I hope I can impart some wisdom, and you'll see that I'm continuing to even pave my own path in this field. So I want to start with the very first comic that I made as a physician, as an MD. I want you to picture sort of the experience and the scenario and the emotions. I had been a student for 20 years in the classroom setting, and suddenly you graduate and the medical doctorate became mine. And just like that, I was back in the hospital setting as a resident. I was a new young doctor, and I was working with a senior doctor who was in ear, nose, and throat for kids. And first patient we walk into, he introduces me, says, I have a pediatrician working with me today. And just like, that's sort of being a mind-blowing experience for me. Like I was no longer a student with a pediatrician behind me. It was me as the pediatrician. And so I decided to sit down. I drew from that emotion, that experience, that like shock of the moment. And this is just the start of a comic that I made for it. And as we'll discuss further in the talk, experience and emotions is what drives like the narrative process. So let's first talk a little bit about my story and where I come from. This is a picture of my family and I. Those are my parents. My father is an immigrant from Ecuador, came to this country undocumented. He's now a proud US citizen. My mother is the child of Italian immigrants to this country. And there's me on her lap. And there's my younger brother over my dad's shoulders. And I'm the child of immigrants. I come from a working class family. There's no professionals that I have who told me like, this is what you have to do. This is the steps to take. But I did have very supportive parents, like tremendously supportive, who helped me, encouraged me to pursue my dreams and pursue my path to being a doctor. I have a great brother who I'm very close with, and both my brother and I are extraordinarily creative. We loved our Legos growing up. We loved our video games. We loved watching anime. And that creative energy is what we even carry into our careers today. From a very young age, I knew I liked science. I knew I liked the human body. I knew I liked medicine. And I knew I loved to draw. And it's funny enough that in the fourth grade, the prompt of whatever our project was eludes me, but I was asked to do something, and I decided to just draw from, I can't remember if it was a magazine or a textbook. I decided to just draw sort of the circulatory system of the heart, and the pulmonary vessels and the arteries, and turn that in as my project. It was something I loved to do. It was a natural talent I had to sort of look at something and capture what it was I was looking at. And I was happy with my project, but my teacher at the time was not. And if I remember correctly, she gave me a C+ on this work, but that didn't deter me. And I pressed forward. And I think sort of in my mind, I was like, well, I can continue doing my drawing work. I can continue that route, or I can just be a doctor. And I was very enthusiastic about being a doctor. My parents were also very happy about me being a doctor. It was, I saw it as an opportunity to go further in life. And I was excited about the opportunities that being a doctor would offer me, even at that young of an age. Whatever sort of naive or cliche perception I have as being a doctor, like that's what I wanted. And I call it sort of a crossroads moment, because I think life itself is full of crossroads, sort of different paths you can take and pursue. But I think the exception to this is that it's not a true crossroad in the sense that it's final. That you go down that route and that other path is lost forever. I think your career and your studies are just a series of branching crossroads that come back again. And I think you'll see other moments in this talk too, where I've had similar moments where I sort of decided to take the next step this way, not necessarily losing the path I was on, but sort of finding different ways to get to where I want to go. And I wanted to talk a bit about high school, because I know a lot of the questions that were asked ahead of time had to revolve around high school. As a student, I focused on my grades. That's sort of my awkward high school photo, I'll call it, of me in the middle there. And I focused on my grades, and I focused on exploring careers in healthcare. There was a program at my school called New Visions Health that gave senior students the opportunities to explore healthcare career paths. And I jumped on that, and I decided to do that. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about what it meant to be a physician. I learned a lot about working in a hospital. I learned a lot about the medical sciences in high school. And I was grateful for the experience. And one of the questions that was asked was if I had any regrets as a high school student. And I think I had very few. I focused on school. I did well in school, and I think that's extremely important. But if I had to pick a regret, I would say it wasn't investing in my own skills and my own creative aspects and interests, particularly with art. As you all know, art is a skill, just like writing, that can be improved upon, that you can get better at with time. And I sort of eschewed it a bit. I didn't invest that time into it. And if I could go back in time, that's definitely something I would do. And then moving on to college, it was a very similar framework where I focused on the classes I was in above all else. And I loved going to college. I went to Fordham University in the Bronx. It's a school I'm gonna rep and love till the day I die, because they supported me in so many ways and supported my academic interests. And I found a love for history. I found a love for the sciences. I found a love for advocacy and working on behalf of vulnerable populations. And, I found a love of teaching, of tutoring students below me, of mentoring. All these things came together in college. And in college, I went a less traditional route in the sense that I didn't, I was a pre-health student, but I didn't just get a biology major. I got a African and African American studies major, and I got a theology minor. And that might seem like very unrelated to the area of medicine, but they're very much integrated to know the different aspects of historical medicine, of knowing a variety of religions, of the various patients that you experience as a doctor. These were things that I thought that I not just loved, but that benefited my path to being a physician. And these are sort of this is where I found myself. And these principles I laid out here, my love of history, science, advocacy, and teaching, these are things I still embody today. This is still the core of like who I am. And it wasn't until my senior year of college that I was presented with an opportunity to, bring out my creative side once again. I took a phenomenal course called Being and Becoming Black, one of the capstone courses of being an African and African Studies major. And I decided to do one of the things I love about college, a paper of like my own interest and my own choosing. And so I did an analytical look at race as well as sexuality in anime, in Japanese anime. Sort of like the portrayal of whiteness, how women are portrayed. And in doing this sort of paper about like actual historical research on the topic, I also decided to add to the paper my own sort of vision for what a racially inclusive, female-centered anime story would look like. And it's through this course in particular that I created my own idea of this, cyberpunk universe in a manga anime like fashion that showed a young Afro-Latina girl in this dream world trying to grapple with themes of racism and sexism. And I did preliminary images for this work. I wrote this story for my paper as sort of like an addendum. And this was like me after many years of not being creative and not just like putting pen to paper and just thinking, that I made this story. And this story and the ideas I took from it would come back years later in medical school and inspire my comic book on type 1 diabetes. Now, what happened after college? This is something I did not know until I was in college, but about a third, 30% of all medical students today took a gap year. And I pulled this from the AAMC, which is like the defining body for the medical school application process. And they define a gap year very well, I think. And I'll read you the definition: a period of time between the end of college or undergrad education and the start of medical school. And it's not necessarily a year. It could be 2 years. It could be several years. And I was sort of wondering, well, what is a gap year per se? And it's really an opportunity for you to invest in yourself and also to work on getting other credentials that can help you become a better physician. And what I decided to do during my gap year was I decided to invest my time in improving my Spanish speaking and to take studio art classes, which I've never done in my life. And so I attended a community college, Westchester Community College, and I took these courses that really showed me, the introduction to the techniques that artists use to capture scenes and images, like this self-portrait that I did here. Um, and it also gave me time to reflect and to think, because I had known and I had explored medicine in college. I had volunteered in hospitals. I had shadowed doctors. I knew exactly what I was looking towards. But I also knew I loved other things, as I mentioned. I knew I loved history. I loved teaching. I loved arts. And I decided medical school was still where I wanted to go, because I was like, I'm going to find a way to pull these interests in, and I'm going to make it part of my career. And I saw medicine as sort of the career that can do it all. And so during my gap year, I was applying to medical schools. I went on my interviews, and ultimately I was accepted to several of them, and I chose to attend Columbia in Manhattan for medical school. This is the day of my white coat ceremony, and those are my parents again. And it was a really great day, and I was excited for what medical school would bring. And I'm going to walk you guys now through like the journey of medicine, and how the arts and narrative medicine sort of became part of my career path. So this is MS1, your first year of medical school. It's as I was talking with Paul Lewis about, it truly is a fire hose of information. It's just a rapid pace of the basic sciences, of the clinical sciences, and it's you trying to absorb all the essential facts as things move quickly along, as you cover biochemistry in a couple of weeks versus an entire semester, for example. And I didn't have a lot of time to draw and create, but what I found myself continually doing was doodling. And these are just aspects of some notes that I have saved, where I just doodled whatever was on my mind, sometimes to keep myself awake during a boring lecture, other times to enhance what I was being taught. And so I doodle a lot in my first year of medical school. I was fortunate enough to go to Columbia, where there's a big emphasis on the medical humanities, on narrative medicine. And in my first year of medical school, excuse me, in the spring, I was offered the chance to do a medical comic book class with Dr. Benjamin Schwartz. He's a Columbia Medical School grad, and he's a cartoonist for the New Yorker magazine. And for me, this was another pivotal moment that felt like a crossroads, where I realized for the first time that I could take my experiences in medicine and create with them. And in this course in particular, I was taught the fundamentals of creating a narrative, of creating, specifically in comic form, the panels of where you want things to go and how you want ideas articulated. I'm going to go through the process a bit more later in the talk, but it's really to say that this course was very, very influential on my thinking. I used the opportunity in the course for the final project to create a medical comic, which I have in the middle here. And I decided to articulate my experience with how race was discussed in medical school as an objective thing, and how I kind of wanted to push against it. Race was much more objective. And I decided to make this comic, and I have a digital version here in the corner that I decided to revisit many years later. But the two concepts I grabbed were, one, narrative medicine, and two, graphic medicine. Now, narrative medicine itself, I captured this from the founder of the field itself, Dr. Rita Sharon. She is now the chair of the Department of Narrative Medicine at Columbia. And she really created the concept. And I think what's very illuminating is that everything a physician does is essentially narrative medicine, right? You go in, you sit down, you talk with a patient, and what do you grasp? Their stories. And what do? You document their stories. You write it in the chart, you type it in the medical record, who they are, where they come from. And there's no other situation where someone that you've just met is so vulnerable with you and opens up about their entire life, their social history, where they live, who they live with. And physicians truly do use narratives in their work every day. And what narrative medicine, the role it plays in medicine, is working on using a close reading of literature and reflective writing to help you craft the experience of patients, of yourself as a physician, even better. And it's growing to be an entire field that a lot of medical schools are now embracing, including medical school I attended at Columbia. By strengthening your skills in capturing the essence of these very difficult conversations you can have with patients, or the very difficult or even joyous moments of medicine, these ultimately make better doctors, and these ultimately make doctors able to better provide care. Now, graphic medicine, and I promise this is the only other slide with text on it. Most of these will just have pictures. Graphic medicine is specifically using comic books and comics to articulate stories between patients and providers, stories between providers and patients, stories of providers going through the stress of being a doctor, stories that critique the medical profession. This is what graphic medicine is, and it's a subset of narrative medicine, and it's the work that I like the most. And so I was introduced to this concept in my first year of medical school, and I consider that sort of like another crossroads. And after this course, what I ended up started doing is I started to put my pen to paper, and so more and more I started to just draw for the heck of it. I went to Germany for basic science research on a grant. I drew my friend playing the cello. I drew things in the environment that I saw. I also went to Japan for basic science research, and what did I do? I drew what I saw around me. I drew funny little anime-like comics of my wife, because she's in the middle, because I get on her nerves a lot. I drew political situations that were happening during the time. I just drew for the sake of drawing my experiences. And this was the majority of my second year as a medical student. Now, the third year of medical school is pivotal because now you enter into your territory of clinical rotations. You're no longer in the classroom all the time. You're mostly in the hospital, following with doctors in different departments, seeing your patients, but really working very closely around doctors. This is the time where you start to gain your own autonomy and your own ability to see what a field is like. And you go through all the major specialties in this year, month to month. It's a very intense time because every month you're learning a different culture of the department and how things are done. Surgery, very quick presentations, very quick, insights with patients. Psychiatry, very long sort of presentations, very long discussions with patients. And this picture here is the only thing I ended up drawing in my clinical year because it was so intensive. And I captured a very emotional experience in the pediatric emergency department of a mother and her child. Her child had gotten a laceration, a cut above the eye, and the child was going to have it stitched up. And I sort of captured this experience of this mother, I would describe as angelically, very statuesque, firmly holding this child, but also tearing as she watched her child cry while getting the lacerations. And I started to capture this. This almost looks like a fishing hook, but it's actually the needle that's used to sew the stitches. And this moment I captured in this hustle and bustle of the emergency department. And I drew it because I was actually asked to as a project to sort of capture a patient experience. They suggested writing, but they said you're free to draw, and I decided to draw. Stepping away from sort of the drawing aspect, I learned a lot about what I liked in medicine, what I like to do as a doctor. And the things I was drawn to was surgery, was psychiatry, was emergency medicine, and pediatrics. And for various reasons, I like these fields, even though they seem very different. You know, ultimately what I decided was pediatrics was the place I wanted to be, specifically going down a route of pediatric emergency medicine. So rather than doing emergency with adults, I'd rather go like the pediatrics route. And there was a lot I liked about pediatrics. I know some people have questions about why pediatrics. It's a field where more than any other specialty, advocacy work, working on legislation, working on public health, working on community health is at the core of what they do. You can become a surgeon and you can make that a priority of yours, but as a field, surgery is not going to value that as much as pediatrics does. And that's what I was drawn to. I wanted advocacy to be a part of everything I did in my life. It was also a field that embraced a holistic view of medicine. It encouraged narrative medicine and encouraged other aspects of medicine as parts of being a physician, which I really enjoyed. And I also love the opportunity to work with children. I thought children were a joy, and I felt like I would have a lot of joy working with them. It also felt like a place where I could be myself. I'm an adult, but I still love my video games. I still love my cartoons, and I enjoy those. And it was something I found that I could share with my patients. And lastly, I felt that kids and their families were some of the most vulnerable population groups that I could think of, that needed a lot of support and a lot of care and a lot of resources. And that's always been what I've been drawn to do, is help the most vulnerable. So I ultimately decided that pediatrics after my clinical year was where I wanted to go. Now, my fourth year of medical school, this is particular to Columbia, but other medical schools are embracing this too. I had the opportunity to do a scholarly project. It was actually a requirement for graduation. And this is the time where the school offers 4 to 6 months to just work on your project. And what I'll say is 90% of medical students at Columbia or at other schools that this opportunity is offered, a scholarly project, will invest in basic science research, which is a great thing to do. I decided to step outside the box a bit, and I knew I had loved my narrative medicine work. So I said, I want to do a narrative project more than anything. I want to do a graphic medicine project. And I saw this as such a unique opportunity because in the 20 years that I was a student, I didn't have time to just sit down and do nothing, absolutely nothing but create and draw and make something that could have an impact. So I jumped on the process, and I wanted to take a moment to describe the first part of like my creative process, because I know that was something else that people had asked. And you know, one was, what do I do, right? I want to create something, but how do I just decide on that idea? And my advice and what I ended up doing is just to take a step back, get a quiet space, tune everyone out, dedicate an hour, 2 hours of your time, and just put your pen to paper and write, draw, anything, like whatever comes to mind. And then from there, you take those ideas and you can tweak them later on. But I decided to sit down and I said, I want to do a project that's impactful in medicine, that's impactful in pediatrics. And my cousin, who's pictured here, Karina, she has type 1 diabetes. She was only diagnosed recently. And type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition. It's something that you can just be a normal kid and then suddenly get. And it means that for the rest of your life, you have a chronic condition that you have to manage. Your body doesn't produce insulin, a hormone that breaks down sugars. And so everything that you eat, you have to regulate, you have to check your sugar levels in your blood, and you have to then give yourself artificial insulin. And I wanted to take her experience and I wanted to use that to motivate. And so that's what I ended up doing. And I knew I loved like this sort of futuristic cyberpunk aesthetic. I knew I liked, I knew I wanted to make it a character of color. I knew I wanted to make it very female centric. And so I just brought these ideas together. So that's the first part, right? Taking a time to sit down and just go, like not have any pressures on yourself, just go with it.
Yeah. Hi.
Part,
Hi.
I had to create a creative space. And I think this is key. I think you have to make a space for yourself where you are able to write, where you are able to draw. And here in the pictures of very early stages of where I'm sitting now, where I set up my desk just with enough space that I can sort of spread my materials out. I set up my easel. And I think that's like very crucial, because if you're going to invest yourself and your time into your craft, you need to also invest in trying to create the space. And it doesn't have to be the most expensive space, but it has to just be a space for you to work. And that's definitely a huge piece of advice I'd like to offer. Now, what I did during this time, 4 to 6 months, not only was I creating a story and writing out a story, I was creating characters, I was illustrating outfits, costumes, environments, everything you can think of that goes into a work of media. And I was also learning this time, all my artwork up to this point was traditional, pencil to paper, pen to paper. And for the first time, I learned to go from traditional to incorporating digital aspects, because when you can draw on the computer, you can do things you can't do in the traditional. If you draw something that's a little bit too small, a little bit too disproportionate, you can then fix it easier in the digital landscape. You can make things pop more. You can do all kinds of things. And so that's what I learned how to do. I bought a Microsoft Surface laptop, a laptop with a pen that I'm using now, and I could write out and draw and get my ideas not just traditional, but make them clear cut in the digital landscape. And so it was a new skill that I developed. And what I ultimately ended up creating was a comic book on type 1 diabetes for kids, as I mentioned. It's called Liz Unity and Her Somatic Adventures being sort of bodily adventures. And she is a cybernetic Afro-Latina insulin unit that travels through the body, which you can see here. This is sort of like the city of the pancreas. And she goes to the vessels of the body, very much like the metro system, like the subway. And she fights excessive glucose sugar monsters in the body. And I created this story with the idea of a new kid or young adolescent who was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, who had like no concept of what was going on inside their body, right? It's jarring to suddenly be told that you have to change your entire way of life. And I used, first and foremost, a narrative story to be interesting, to be a cool story that they can relate to have a cool character they can relate to. But then also to be educational. And at the end of each part of my story, I have a chibi, or like a cute little version of the main character, Liz, who sort of is in a very meta way reading the comic and then sort of walking through themes and concepts in the story and tying them to actual type 1 diabetes education. What type 1 diabetes is, what happens in the body, how it's treated. And the idea is to better communicate with patients. Doctors traditionally have a very stale, sort of boring way of teaching patients, especially kids, about their diagnoses. And this was a chance to not go that route and to be more engaging, more interactive, to speak more to them. And it's a work I'm very proud of. And I had the opportunity to, thanks to a grant from Columbia, I had the opportunity to print out my work and to have like a fully readable version that I'm looking now to donate to our diabetes center, so that the kids there can use it and can be inspired by it and more empowered in their own diagnosis. And it's sort of like something I want to do with my career going forward. I want to make more works like this. So that was my scholarly project. I completed that in the early spring of my last year of medical school, right around, actually just right before the pandemic hit. And then the pandemic hit. And, everything suddenly went from in-person to virtual, just like that. It was, it's New York City, it was peak time. And I decided to continue to use graphic medicine to articulate my experience during that time. This is a comic of me literally having to learn CPR through a course in my apartment, having to practice on my pillows, having to fill my time with things, having to try and eat healthy, having to invest in my own free time and watch some Netflix, some BoJack Horseman. And I also try to capture the experience of what it was like to graduate. I graduated in April, earlier than I would have graduated. I would have graduated in May if not for the pandemic. And what that was like to have this new medical degree, to graduate virtually. And I just kept drawing. I kept that creative process going. Not only that, but I use graphic medicine to articulate the true pain I was experiencing at seeing the racial injustice that was occurring all around us in this country after the death of George Floyd, after the death of Breonna Taylor and others. And I started to try and capture what I think is fundamental to being a physician is that physicians are not just healers of the body, but they should be healers of a system that hurts communities we serve. And there's no other more oppressive system, I think, than the system of racism. And I wanted to articulate that my values of a physician are to push against that narrative, to push against these systems of race, and to use the privilege and the prestige that comes with being a physician to do so. And so that's also work that I did shortly after, around the time of my graduation, shortly before going to residency. And in residency, I continued to create. I showed you that comic at the beginning of the presentation about my very first week and sort of that experience, what was that was like. And here's another comic from my third week. When I walked into a patient, I walked in nice and confident. I said, "Hi, I'm Dr. Mogrovejo. I'm your pediatrician." And the mother just gave me a look and was like, "Are you the doctor or the resident?" And that was sort of a moment where I was like, whoa, like, what does that even mean? Those aren't separate entities. Those are the same thing. It was a moment where I took a step back, and as I was drawing the experience, I took it very calmly. I said, well, I'm actually both, I'll be taking care of you today. When I went home, I decided to take a step back and be, at least laugh at the moment and say, well, yeah, I am a young doctor. I'm a baby doctor. And that was a comic I created. And creativity, another point I'd like to express, is creativity creates and leads to more creativity. So this idea of just sitting down and jotting down a comic led me to start a weekly webcomic series called Baby Doc, where I literally just articulate my experiences as a doctor, as a young doctor, in the form of being a baby. Because that's sort of how I feel like, this nice white coat I have, it's very prestigious looking, but it also, at least metaphorically, feels like I have a lot to learn to grow into it. And so that's what I've been doing throughout residency. I'm now 4 months in as a young doctor, and I've been drawing my perspectives. I've been drawing patient perspectives, what they see me as, and I've been drawing about race and medicine, something that I'm very passionate about sort of breaking down misconceptions and the dogma that exists in medicine of how race should be used with patients. And so that's my new series. And I want to use my most recent comic to sort of go through the process of the narrative work, which is something that you guys had also asked about. And I think first and foremost, any narrative work you create, whether it's drawing in comic form like this in graphic medicine, or whether it's writing, whether it's poetry, whether it's music, all these things come from an experience, They come from something you've encountered. And from that experience, the thing they take from it is the emotion. Like, you know, if, what were you feeling at that time? Were you embarrassed? Was the situation awkward? You know, did you see a lot of anger in someone's face, in a patient's face? Did you see joy in the situation? Tap in and find out and jot down what those emotions were. Then comes the part of thinking about how do I want to express these emotions and this experience. And you know, in comic form, it comes to how do I want to just in a couple of panels grasp this experience. And once you have a good idea of how you want to express it, how you want to make it succinct so that the viewer just grasps what you're doing right away, you then go to the work of actually creating what you have. And this is like the general roadmap I use. And it's something that served me well. And I want to use this particular panel to say like, to walk you through these steps. This comic in particular came from an experience I had. I was doing a 24-hour shift. I was at the tail end. I was 23 out of 24 hours. It was 5 a.m. in the morning. And I was checking on all my patients before I then signed them off to the day person. And I was a bit tired, I was a bit groggy, and I went in to see a patient who was known to have respiratory distress, who had cystic fibrosis, who had bad lungs, to be blunt. And we were watching their oxygen levels very closely on the monitor. And I go in to see this patient, and the monitor we normally attach to their finger that shows their oxygen levels was off. So being a good doctor, you know, I took it, the patient was asleep this early, and I just wrapped it around their finger, and then I turned the monitor back on. And all of a sudden, blaring noise came out, and there's red flashes around a 67 number. Now, a normal person is gonna have an oxygen level of 100%, 98% at the lowest, meaning that's how your blood is filled with oxygen. This person in particular, we wanted levels above 90%. So if they were at 90% oxygen, we were okay. Suddenly I get a number flashing in front that says 67, right? That's not good. They're not being oxygenated properly. Their brain's not getting enough oxygen. This is an urgent situation. And so I like very frantically, calmly, I should say, internally very frantically, you know, I open the door, I say, you know, please, can you get our nurse J, I'll call her, can you please like bring her in? Like, you know, I think we're gonna have to start increasing his oxygen level. We're gonna have to do something. And very quickly she came in, you know, she saw the look on my face that I was serious. And she looked at the monitor and said, actually, that number that's beeping, that's his heart rate. And when you first turn on the machine, it beeps, you know, when the heart rate isn't at a certain range. And the 67 is fine. The oxygen was right above in smaller fonts. It said 98%. And it was a moment where I reacted properly as a doctor, but I was also very embarrassed and very just like, okay, that was like a huge, you know, a very intern-like moment. And so I took that experience. I took the emotions attached with it, right? The sort of internal panic, the frantic nature, and then the embarrassment of it. And I just said, let me capture this in a couple of different panels. So I said, first panel, I'm going to be seeing this blaring 67. I'm going to be calling the nurse in the next panel. The nurse is going to come, and then the nurse is going to very casually explain that that's not like the way it is, and sort of capture what my ultimate emotion was, which, as you could see, sort of just me dying on the spot with this ghost version of me just popping up and being like, well, you know, I'm still breathless despite this being, you know, normal oxygen. So that's sort of the process that I go through. And another question you guys had was advice for this process. And one of the things I wanted to add on was each piece that you make, each thing that you write or that you draw or compose makes you a better person at that skill, and makes the next piece even better and the next piece even better. And that's just like a tidbit I wanted to share. And then a lot of you guys had questions about what it's like to be a doctor, what my day is like, what the schedule is like. And And to be a young doctor is challenging. It's a lot of hours. It's full of a lot of emotions because you see patients at their highest, right? If you fix a kid, it's incredible. And you see patients at their lowest, whether they have medical abuse or medical neglect. So it's full of this roller coaster. And you can have all that in the span of 20 minutes. You see one patient here, another patient here. And so there's a lot of emotions attached with it. These are some of the pictures I've taken as a new person to Instagram, starting to document my experiences. And not only are the challenges emotional, but a lot of you want to know about just challenges in general in this journey. And I think one, being underrepresented in medicine, and what does that mean? It means being Black, Latino, Native American. It means your representation in the field of medicine compared to the population is much, much, much lower. So being from that kind of group and not having a lot of Black or Latino physicians around me is challenging, because then it's hard for me to sort of see myself when everyone around me is predominantly white. There's still a large predominance of men in the field of medicine, not so much in pediatrics where it's mostly women now. But that's very challenging in itself. I think something that not just myself as someone who's underrepresented in medicine, but people in general go through in medicine is something called imposter syndrome. And it's that, like, you study hard, you work hard, you get into a good college, you get into a good medical school, whatever it is, and you're just questioning whether or not you really belong there, whether there was some bit of luck that you just slipped in and you're not actually meant to be there because maybe people around you seem smarter or you're going through a very challenging time. And I think that's been something I've always grappled with, that I've gotten more comfortable with and better with. But I think imposter syndrome is another real challenge. As I mentioned earlier in my talk, I'm proud of where I come from. I'm proud of my background, but there are challenges to not having professionals in your family, not having a doctor in your family who can sort of tell you what that process is like. As you get higher and higher in professional fields and academia, most of my classmates, for example, at Columbia, or at least half of them, came from families who had doctors, who understood what it was even like to present on rounds, to have a patient, physician relationship, to go through academia. And these were all very new things to me. And so that in itself is a challenge if you don't have doctors in your family. It's by no means impossible, but it is a challenge that I went through. And I think lastly, one of the challenges I have is I have a strong sense of justice. And medicine is a system with established rules, traditions, and hierarchy, where the attending physician listens to the chair of the department, the fellow listens to the attending, the resident listens to the fellow, the medical student to the resident, and so on. And it's a system I've never been comfortable in because I have a lot of humility, and I feel like that kind of system and what I've experienced sets up dynamics where people on top feel like they can be, I'll say, inhumane to the people below and not treat them with dignity and respect. I think all adults in our profession and all people in general deserve. And so that can be difficult when you have a strong sense of justice and in a system that doesn't appreciate that as much. Pediatrics is more appreciative of it, but other specialties, not so much. And I promise I'm getting close to the end of the presentation. I'm trying to be on time. But I also wanted to show this breakdown of a typical day for me, because I had to get to orientation of residency to see what this day was going to be like. I had an idea, but then when it's in front of you, it's a different ball game. And my day is sort of, in the morning, I get there, I have to be there 6:30 a.m. and I get my new patients for the day. Up until 8 a.m., I have to process their stories, their histories, what brought them in. I have to go through their charts, their records, and this can be up to 6-7 patients at a time on a very, very busy day. Thankfully for me, it's been no more than 5. And then I have to go check on each of them, and they can be on different floors of the hospital. So in this very short window of time, about 45 minutes, you have to go through the computer, grasp these patients, see them. Then you have your conference in the morning, your learning. That's part of any experience of being a young doctor, is you always have more learning. And then from about 9 o'clock all the way to noon, you are presenting these patients. So you have to have a good idea of what these patients are and their story. Then you have to now, in a very succinct way, you have to articulate their stories to the team of residents, of attendings, of specialists. And it's a lot of pressure. For me, as someone who's always struggled with performance anxiety and public speaking, it's a lot. It's a lot of stress to do day to day. But you present their story and you present your own thinking, your critical medical thinking on them. And in between doing all that, you're also answering calls from nurses, you're putting in orders, you're running up in case a patient needs you urgently and coming back down. It's a lot of work. You get more teaching around noon. That gives you a break from all that. But then from 1 p.m., as late as it really can be, it tends to be around 5 p.m. as an average. You do your work for your patients. You know, you're calling other specialists about them. You're doing paperwork. You're seeing your patients and talking with them and getting their concerns. And then you have to sign out everything you've done for this patient and capture this patient to the resident who's staying. And at my institution, we do 24-hour shifts. So if I was the 24-hour intern, which happens on average every 4 days, I would get all these new patients, and suddenly I have 15, 20, 25 patients that I'm taking care of for the entire night. So from 5 p.m. to 6 a.m. in the morning the next day. So it's a lot. That's like sort of like the gist of it, of what it is to be a doctor in residency. And it's hard to find the balance. That was another question you guys had. How do you find balance? And it's very difficult because this is probably like my best breakdown of my day, where 81% of the time is clinical work, right? 80 to 100 hours a week as a young doctor working. It gets better with time when you're an attending physician, when you're done with your training. But you're still going to be working a lot of hours no matter what. You're still going to be putting in, 60, 80-hour work weeks. And so this is sort of like the breakdown of my time right now. 81% of it is this clinical work, but I make time almost every day to come home, sit down and do my narrative medicine work to really think through. And I do spend as much time as I can on the floor working on presentations for the medical students and teaching them, because that's something I enjoy incredibly much. And then, always trying to make time. It's very difficult. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's hard to find time for family, for my wife, but I always include that time. And this is ideally what I'd like to do with my time. I'd like to do more of the medical humanities work. I'd like to do more writing about race and medicine or graphic medicine work. And I'd like to do more teaching. I love medicine as a field. I love the art of interviewing a patient, of doing a physical exam, of the clinical sciences. I love, science in general. I love teaching more than anything. And I think clinical work is something that I want to make, less of a focus on in my career. And I consider the point I'm at now another crossroads, so to speak, where I don't have everything figured out, but I know I'm going in the right direction. And I'll be very humble on that point that I don't know what's going to come next per se. And I think someone had asked about whether or not my path was atypical in medicine, and I want to say absolutely, it is atypical right now to sort of try and blend these aspects together. Medicine traditionally has doctors who are clinical, who see patients, and then their secondary responsibilities are teaching in the classroom, teaching medical students and doing other work. But I think now more than ever, schools are starting to embrace the idea that it's better to have doctors who are, their main focus is teaching more than anything. Because what ends up happening is you have your teachers, your professors in medical school who really aren't the best teachers, not because they can't be, not that because they don't have the potential to be, but because their focus is in the clinic. They're literally running from a patient to go teach you a lecture, and then they're running back. And I think medical schools are embracing that. They're starting to get teachers who are not just clinicians, who are not just seeing patients, who are not just doing basic science research. They're starting to branch out more. And I'm hopeful that can be part of that new wave. And I think one of the other points I wanted to make just from this idea of balance is that going forward in your life, you should never think of work-life balance, because I think work-life balance implies being static, right? Implies this is your day every day. A little bit you donate to here, a little bit you donate to here. A much better idea as you go forward in your careers and your education is work-life flexibility, right? Life is always shifting. Family events come up. Unfortunately, funerals happen. Your other interests take priority. And work-life flexibility is really what you should emphasize. Not a balance, but constantly being able to shift your priorities as the day presents itself, as the week presents itself. And I wish someone had told me that earlier on, because I always strive for like, what's this perfect balance that I can find, right? I hit it and then I'm set for life. But work-life flexibility is the better way to do it. So big takeaways from this talk, and I apologize I can end up talking a little bit too much on my soapbox. No matter what you do in life, in your careers, invest in your education. Investing in your education opens up doors. My college degree, my experiences in college, my ability to find myself in college, my medical degree is giving me the opportunity to pursue what I love. Degrees give you opportunities. Degrees open up doors. And it's never wrong to invest in your education as you think about what you want to do in life. If you want to be a doctor, if you want to do something related, I think also put time to invest in your craft, whether that's writing, drawing, etc. Like these skills can be translated in different ways, as you can see with already the work I'm doing. They're not just skills that you do as a hobby. You can incorporate them in your career. And I think it's important to put the time in, set up your space, invest in that space. And I think good things will come of it. Don't neglect your passions. I think any career is going to have downsides to it, or even if you love what you do, you're not going to like it all the time. Don't lose your passions. Like I like video games, as I mentioned. I like my cartoons. I like, I still like my Legos and different things. Like I'm not losing that. Those are things I still do, and in the few bits of free time I have, I pursue those. I think you risk sort of losing a part of yourself and being less happy when you neglect the things you like to do. I think embracing these crossroads, right, as I presented, these metaphorical crossroads, is important. I think, the destination might be here and you might be here, but there's never a linear path. I think life is always going to take you in these weird zigzags. You might backtrack, you might come forward, but eventually you'll get to where you want to be. And I hope you can kind of see that from my experience and taking a gap year and sort of thinking through my life. And nothing you learn on that journey is wasted. Everything is experience, everything is valuable, not just to yourself, but also to whatever career you're going to pursue. And this is just personal advice I have. I think never forget where you came from. Never forget your origins. Never forget who helped you along the way. This is going forward in your careers as you go to college, as you go to medical school and beyond. It's never just you. It's always you and your mentors and the network and the people you meet along the way who are going to help you get there. And I think whenever you get to your success and your destination, always remember to stay humble. I think, as I mentioned, like humility can be lacking at some of, these larger academic centers or prestigious areas, especially when they come from heads of departments or chairs. But I think humility is an important trait. This is what I believe. And I think it will get you far when people see that you're authentic and humble in how you approach things. And this is just a last point that I just sort of connected to what I just said, is that lots of people helped me get here in in high school, in college, in medical school. And this is just a snapshot of some of those people. And remember, you always stand on the shoulders of others, and people always help you achieve your goals. And someone I have to thank is also my wife, who I've drawn here as also a baby doctor version, even though she is a full-fledged oncology pharmacist. She's long past her days of training. And I get a lot of support from her, which is very important. So I hope I got in the right ballpark of time, but I try to answer a lot of the questions that you guys asked. I'm really happy to answer any questions that I didn't address. You can feel free to follow me on Instagram. You can feel free to DM me. I have this website, which I have not updated in a little while, but you can read Liz Unity and her somatic adventures for free. I have it up there. I share it with patients who have diabetes whenever I have them. And you can feel free to reach out to me via email too. I'm very receptive. Like I said, teaching and mentoring is important to me, and it's work that I like to do. So yeah, with that, I'm happy to take questions. I'm happy if Paul wants to relay questions. If I'm all yours. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the talk.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brandon Mogrovejo. There's so much I want to highlight from your presentation. I love the pictures throughout your presentation, artwork, the images, they're fantastic. And then you talked through your journey so well with high school, college, medical school, and beyond. Thanks so much for sharing your experience being first gen without doctors in your family. I also feel like you touched on some really important themes that I wrote some notes on. Your time spent into skills, finding activities you loved, investing in them in terms of teaching, experience, etc. I think you really captured what narrative medicine and graphic medicine stands for and presents for others in those opportunities, especially how you use it as a media for important systemic issues and kind of bolstering your strong sense of justice, which is amazing. And then there are also some great lessons on taking a step back, using experiences and the emotions surrounding them to express and create and finding a work-life flexibility. I also love that you highlighted the diversity of the medical field from being clinical, teaching, narratives, all of that. And I also love the humility behind the oxygen and heart rate story. I got one private message, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand or use the raise hand function or put a message in the chat or unmute yourself. But the one question I was asked that kind of touched on it at the end was, you just went, but you have such an amazing bio going to an Ivy League, and being a physician at Columbia, what helps keep you grounded?
Yeah, I like this question. Definitely my roots, I think, more than anything. I think definitely seeing my family frequently and remembering my heritage, not being if I don't look back, if I don't visit my family enough, if I don't embrace my identity, it's very easy in medicine to get lost in the world of being a physician, where it comes with a whole bunch of prestige, it comes with a whole lot of accolades. People talk to you different. That's like a real thing. People, they see like physician under my name on my badge, they treat me completely different, which is weird, and not something that I particularly like, because I'd rather someone respect me for me. I'd rather people treat each other nicely, period. So I think remembering to step away from that world as often as possible keeps me grounded. I think more than anything. I think my wife keeps me grounded. She's in her own world of pharmacy, but is very different from being a doctor and what a big academic center like Columbia has for doctors. And she kind of helps remind me of what it's like to just be a working healthcare provider and in her own right. And I think making an effort to treat every person I come across with the same kind of respect and kindness that I would just expect as a human being. Like I make an active effort never to bring up my credentials in situations to make a point or to when I'm walking and encountering someone on the street, and I think that's important as well. So I think those things. I think making an active effort to be humble, not forgetting your roots, always touching back with your family members or even friends who are outside of this world, friends who did different careers in business, which I have. I think that reminds you to stay grounded, to stay humble.